That wasn't static on the radio, it was a warning. The official report, stamped and filed, states Deputy Alistair Finch abandoned his cruiser on Route 9 due to acute personal stress. That entry is a lie, a carefully constructed fiction we all agreed to maintain for the sake of public order. The truth is, Finch answered a call he shouldn't have, and something on that frequency answered back. The recording light on the table was a single, unblinking red eye. Officer Kenji Tanaka kept his gaze fixed on it, a focal point in the sound-dampened sterility of Briefing Room 3. He knew the official incident report for Deputy Alistair Finch, file number 7B441, was already signed, sealed, and on its way to archival. It was a neat, plausible document citing dereliction of duty and citing evidence of a pre-existing unstable psychological state. It was also a complete and utter fabrication, a necessary fiction constructed to keep the concrete walls of the world from cracking. This testimony, this recording, was for the file that didn't exist. His transfer to the county sheriff's department had been a deliberate move away from the city's relentless, predictable violence. Head sought the quiet monotony of long patrol routes through dense forests and forgotten farm roads. What he found instead was a different kind of quiet, one that felt heavier, older. The station itself was a squat brick building that smelled of damp paper and industrial-strength coffee. On his first day, Sergeant Eva Rostova had given him the tour, not with the forced enthusiasm of a welcome wagon, but with the weary pragmatism of a woman who had seen too many new faces cycle through. Rostova was a fixture, a woman carved from the same granite as the surrounding hills. Her uniform was always impeccably pressed, her graying hair pulled into a severe bun, and she moved with an economy of motion that suggested no energy was ever wasted. She walked him through the standard operating procedures, the patrol zones, the delicate politics of the small townships. It was all by the book, exactly what he expected. Then, as they stood by the dispatch console, she lowered her voice, the crackle of a distant radio check filling the momentary silence. "I've read your file, Tanaka," she said, her eyes not on him but on the blinking lights of the console. "You're a good cop. City instincts. You see a threat, you neutralize it. You hear a call for help, you answer it. Out here, some of the calls aren't for you. Some of them are tracks." Had assumed she was speaking metaphorically about ambushes or domestic disputes that turned sideways. He nodded, offering a practiced, professional assurance. "Understood, Sergeant." Rostova finally turned to face him, her gaze so direct it felt like a physical weight. "No, I don't think you do. We have protocols here, the official ones you read in your binder. Then we have the others. There are 7 of them. They are not written down. You will not ask why they exist. You will simply follow them." She held up a single, thick finger. "Protocol 1: if dispatch assigns you a call to any address on Old Niller Road, you confirm the address twice. If they confirm, you proceed, but you do not exit your vehicle until you see a secondary unit arrive. No matter what you hear from inside." She continued down a list of bizarre, hyper-specific directives involving certain intersections after midnight, strange lights in the forest, and a blanket refusal to engage with any civilian vehicle that was a perfect replica of your own patrol car. Each rule was more unsettling than the last, delivered in a flat, clinical tone that defied argument. Then she got to the last one. "Protocol 7, she said, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "This is the most important. It's the one that gets people. Sooner or later, you'll be on patrol, probably deep in a dead zone, and your radio will crackle. You'll hear a voice, clear as day, cutting through the static. And it will be your own." Tanaka felt a cold prickle of disbelief, but the look on Rostova's face silenced the question on his lips. She wasn't joking. "It will sound exactly like you," she continued, the same cadence, the same tone. "It might be calling for backup. It might be reporting a traffic stop. It might even be screaming. You will not respond. You will not key your mic. You will turn your radio off, drive directly back to the station, and you will not speak of it to anyone but me. Is that understood?" Back in the sterile briefing room, Tanaka took a slow breath, the hum of the ventilation system the only sound. He looked past the red light, toward the shadowed glass of the observation window, knowing someone was listening. "I am making this recording," he said, his voice steady and formal, "because Deputy Finch is gone. And he is gone because he heard a voice on the radio, and he did what any good officer would do. He answered the call." The fog rolled in off the reservoir just after midnight, thick and wet, clinging to the asphalt of the county roads like a shroud. Inside the patrol unit, the world was reduced to the rhythmic sweep of the wipers and the twin beams of the headlights cutting a temporary tunnel through the gloom. Officer Maria Flores was behind the wheel, her hands steady, navigating the winding turns with the ingrained knowledge of someone who'd grown up on these back roads. She was younger than Tanaka by a decade but had 5 years in this county, which made her the senior partner by default in this strange, quiet territory. "You get used to the fog," she said, not taking her eyes off the road. "Makes you rely on your ears more than your eyes." Tanaka grunted in acknowledgement, scanning the impenetrable wall of trees that lined the road. In the city, visibility like this would have been a tactical nightmare. Out here, it was just Tuesday. The quiet was the part he was still adjusting to. Hours could pass with nothing but the drone of the engine and the occasional check-in with dispatch. It was the peace Head thought he wanted. The radio broke the silence with a burst of harsh static, a sound like tearing paper that made both of them jump. It wasn't the familiar, gentle hiss of an open channel but something sharp, abrasive. A voice struggled to break through the noise, thin and panicked. "Can't see ye's here please." 1412 black. The signal dissolved into another shriek of static before cutting out completely. Flores reached for the mic. "Dispatch, did you copy that transmission?" Sounded like a possible 1031. The reply from dispatch was clear and calm. "Negative, Unit 7. Air is clear on our end. No calls for service in your sector." Tanaka and Flores exchanged a look. Radio interference wasn't uncommon in the hills, but this had been different. It had sounded structured, like a failed broadcast. "Probably just atmospheric skip," Flores muttered, more to herself than to him. She settled back in her seat, her knuckles a little tighter on the wheel. The radio crackled again, and the same voice sliced through, clearer this time, laced with a sob that felt unnervingly close. "Ria, please, he's at the door. 1412, Black Creek Road, please hurry." The car swerved slightly as Flores' entire body went rigid. Her breath hitched. Ria was what her family called her. No one on the force used that name. Tanaka stared at her, a cold dread washing over him as he saw the blood drain from her face. "Flores?" he asked, his voice low. "That's my sister," she whispered, her eyes wide, locked on the radio as if it were a venomous snake. "That's Sophia." He felt the echo of Rostova's warnings in the back of his mind. "Some of the calls aren't for you." He keyed the mic, his own voice tight and controlled. "Dispatch, run a wellness check for Sophia Flores," and he looked to his partner. "She's at the State University 200 miles away," Flores cut in, her voice trembling but hardening with resolve. "She's in her dorm." But that was her voice. She was already punching the address into the NDT. The screen flashed a blunt, red message: address not found. "There's number 1412 Black Creek Road," Tanaka stated, trying to keep his tone procedural. "The system has no record of it." "The system is new," Flores shot back, her professional calm shattered by a raw, familial fear. "Black Creek is an old service road. It was decommissioned 20 years ago. I know where it is." She stopped on the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest as she wrenched the wheel, turning them off the paved county highway and onto a barely visible gravel track swallowed by the fog. Tanaka didn't argue. The protocol was to back your partner, and the sound in that voice, whoever it belonged to, was genuine terror. But every instinct, sharpened by years on the force and seeded with Rostova's bizarre roles, screamed that they were driving into a trap. He kept his hand near his sidearm as they plunged deeper into the fog, the gravel road narrowing until the branches of ancient trees scraped against both sides of the car. The world outside was gone, and the only reality was the frantic, terrified voice of a girl who was supposed to be miles away. After 10 minutes that felt like an hour, a shape loomed out of the mist. It was a farmhouse, skeletal and dark, its roofline sagging like a broken spine. A rusted, leaning mailbox at the end of the drive read 1412. Flores slammed on the brakes, killing the engine and the headlights simultaneously. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. There were no lights on in the house, no sign of life, nothing but the oppressive weight of the fog and the sight of a home that looked like it had been abandoned for a generation. The silence that followed the engine as shutdown was profound, a heavy blanket that smothered all other sound. Tanaka and Flores exited the cruiser, their movements economical and practiced. Maglights cut sharp, white cones through the soupy air, catching on the glistening moisture that clung to everything. The farmhouse stood before them, a two-story relic of rotted wood and broken windows, its silhouetted jagged tear in the fabric of the fog. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass on the porch, no indication of the frantic struggle suggested by the radio call. The only movement was the slow, ceaseless drift of the mist. "Police!" Flores called out, her voice tight but carrying. "Anyone in the residence, make yourself known." The only reply was the drip of condensation from the eaves. Tanaka took point, his sidearm drawn and held in a low ready position. "Porch is unstable," he murmured, testing a step that groaned in protest. The front door was ajar, hanging crookedly on a single hinge. He pushed it open with the barrel of his light, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. The air that wafted out was thick with the smells of mildew, dust, and something else, a faint, acrid scent like burned sugar and ozone. They moved inside, sweeping their lights across the interior. The house was a time capsule of decay. Furniture lay shrouded in dusty white cloths, transformed into lumpy, anonymous shakes. Cobwebs, thick as cotton, draped every corner. The floorboards creaked under their weight, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. A thick, uniform layer of dust covered every surface, a fine gray powder that hadn't been disturbed in what looked like decades. There were no footprints. Not a single scuff mark. They cleared the ground floor methodically. A collapsed kitchen, a dining room with a skeletal table. Every room was the same, abandoned, silent, and sealed by time. It was in the living room that they found the source of the ozone smell. Sitting on a small table against the far wall was a radio. It was a massive, archaic thing, a cathedral-style console made of dark, polished wood, its speaker covered in a filigreed cloth grill. It didn't belong with the rest of the decaying furniture that would seem to drink the light from their flashlights, and its surface was curiously free of dust. From the vents in the back, a faint, warm orange light pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. The vacuum tubes were active. Tanaka's gaze followed the frayed power cord it wasn't plugged into a wall socket. It was just a dead end, its prongs resting on the dusty floorboards a foot from the nearest outlet. Flores took a hesitant step closer, her light fixed on the radio's glowing heart. "How is that possible?" she whispered. As if in answer, the radio emitted a low hum. A crackle of static erupted from the cloth speaker, sharp and sudden. It wasn't the sound of a station trying to tune in. It was the same abrasive, tearing noise they'd heard in the cruiser. Then, a voice bled through the static, a voice they both recognized instantly, though it was warped and unnaturally slow, dragged down as if being played at half speed. "Thoughts, my Alistair." It was Flores' own voice from just minutes before, her panicked whisper twisted into a grotesque, drawn-out moan. The recording was perfect, capturing the hitch in her breath, the tremor of fear. Tanaka felt his blood run cold. The playback continued, a macabre recap of their approach. The Siastem Haas knew reaccord off it. His own procedural statement was now a deep, guttural drawl that seemed to vibrate in the very air of the room. He took a step back, pulling Flores with him by the arm. Her face was a mask of horrified disbelief. The broadcast from the impossible radio reached its conclusion. The slowed-down recording of their voices faded, not into silence, but into something else. The static returned, but it was different now. It was a soft, sibilant rush, a chorus of dry, overlapping whispers. It wasn't a language, had no recognizable words or cadence, but it felt intelligent, 1,000 hushed, insectal voices chittering all at once from the speaker of a radio that had no power, and a house that had been dead for years. The drive back to the station was a silent, tense affair. Flores had pulled over twice to call her sister, her voice a mixture of forced calm and frantic relief when Sophia finally answered, complaining groggily about being woken up. The confirmation that she was safe in her dorm room, 200 miles away, did nothing to erase the memory of her voice pleading for help from a radio that shouldn't have been working. It only made the event more monstrous. They filed a preliminary report that was a masterpiece of omission, responded to an unconfirmed radio transmission, conducted a search of an abandoned structure. Premises were vacant. No signs of criminal activity. It was technically true, and functionally a lie. Tanaka found Sergeant Rostova in her office, nursing a mug of what looked like tar-black coffee under the harsh fluorescent lights. She didn't invite him to sit. He stood before her desk and gave her the clipped, verbal version of the report, leaving out the mimicry, the impossible power source, the whispers. He knew, instinctively, that those details were not for official channels. When he finished, Rostova was silent for a long moment, stirring her coffee with a pen. She didn't look surprised or skeptical. She looked tired, as if he'd just confirmed a diagnosis she'd long been dreading. "Flores," she said, her voice flat. The voice it used was personal to her? Tanaka's throat was dry. Her sister. Rostova nodded slowly, a single, grim acknowledgement. She opened her desk drawer and removed a small, tarnished brass key attached to a simple metal tag stamped with the number 117. She slid it across the desk. It stopped just short of his fingers. "Downstairs archives. Back corner, by the old boiler," she said. "You'll read it, you will put it back, and you will not discuss its contents with anyone. Especially not Flores. She has family here. She doesn't need this in her head." It was an order, not a suggestion. The archives were a basement crypt for forgotten paperwork. The air was cool and smelled of damp concrete and decaying paper. A single, bare bulb cast a web of shadows from the towering shelves of stacked, string-tied boxes. In the far corner, coated in a film of dust, was a bank of rusted metal lockers. Locker 117 creaked open with a sound like a breaking bone. Inside, there was only one object, a thick, black, department-issue logbook, its cover worn smooth at the edges. There was no official label, just the name SGT.D. Miller embossed in faded gold lettering. Tanaka took it to a small wooden table beneath the light and opened it. The first entry was dated 1978. The handwriting was a neat, precise cursive, the ink a faded blue. It began as a standard patrol log but quickly devolved. October 12, 1978 call came through on sector channel. "Sounded like Mary crying for help," said shed wrecked the sedan on Ridge Road. Rushed to location. No wreck. Found cruiser in a ditch 2 hours later. Deputy Evans missing. Official story disoriented, wandered into the woods. Mary was at her sister's house all night. Tanaka flipped through the pages. It was a catalog of anomalies spanning 3 decades, the secret history of the county's tragedies. Each entry followed a chillingly familiar pattern. A phantom call, a personal lure, and a disappearance. June 4, 1985 received a 1033 from what sounded like Old Man Hemlock. Said kids were trespassing on his property again. Voice was clear. Sent a unit. Hemlock's place was empty, found him in his armchair. Coroner said heart failure, at least 48 hours prior. The officer who took the call, rookie named Peterson, quit the next day. November 22, 1994 heard my own damn voice. Said I had a suspect at gunpoint behind the old mill. Clear as day. Remembered the rule. Turned the radio off and drove straight back. Shaking so bad I almost hit a deer. Finch, who was a deputy then, told me I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Told him it was bad coffee. The entries grew more frantic over time. The neat cursive became a desperate scrawl. Miller had started underlining phrases, connecting incidents with furious ink lines, filling the margins with paranoid questions. He documented atmospheric conditions, solar flares, geological surveys, trying to find a rational explanation for the impossible. He found none. Near the end of the book, in a section from the late 2000s, just before Miller's retirement, Tanaka found a paragraph circled so many times the paper was worn thin. It's not a broadcast. It's a net. It uses our own signals, our own voices, our own fears as bait. It learns from what it hears, getting better, more precise with each attempt. We think we're broadcasting into silence, but the silence is listening. It's not a ghost in the machine. It's a frequency that hunts. Tanaka closed the logbook, the worn leather cool beneath his hands. The 7 protocols weren't the eccentric rules of a backwoods department. They were a shield, dealt one disappearance at a time over 30 years of bitter experience. And last night, he and Flores had walked right through it. Procedure demanded that any unusual event be documented. While the official report on the farmhouse was deliberately vague, Tanaka had created a secondary, private record. Standing in the oppressive silence of that living room, he had activated the audio recorder on his department-issued phone and captured 30 seconds of the broadcast from the vintage radio, the tail end of his own distorted voice, and the cascade of insectal whispers that followed. It was a clear violation of Rostova's order to not speak of it, but Miller's logbook had convinced him that silence was a luxury the department could no longer afford. He needed data. He found Ben Carter in his natural habitat, a small, windowless room in the Station S basement that was less of an office and more of a dragon's hoard of electronics. Wires snaked across the floor like vines, connecting gleaming modern servers to dusty oscilloscopes and cannibalized radio chassis from the 1970s. Carter himself, a man with a perpetually frayed look and glasses perched on his forehead, was hunched over a circuit board, a soldering iron in one hand and a pair of delicate tweezers in the other. He was a civilian, a contractor who'd been maintaining the county's aging radio infrastructure for 15 years, and he understood its quirks better than anyone. "Ben," Tanaka said from the doorway. Carter didn't look up, his focus absolute. "Got a minute? I have an audio file I need you to look at." From a field recording. Carter finished his task with a tiny puff of solder smoke, then finally swiveled in his chair. "Field recording? Don't you guys just write things down anymore?" He gestured to an empty stool. "Fine. What fresh hell have you brought me?" "Let me guess, another one of those yahoos with an illegal broadcast amplifier bleeding over dispatch channels?" "Something like that," Tanaka hedged, connecting his phone to Carter's console. He played the file. The sound filled the small room, unsettlingly clear. First, the deep, guttural echo of Tanaka's voice, then the sibilant rush of the whispering. Carter listened with his head cocked, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to professional curiosity. He didn't comment on the content, only the quality of the signal itself. "Okay, that's weird," he said, pulling the file onto his main monitor. He brought up a spectrograph, converting the sound into a visual display of frequencies over time. "Where did you record this?" "From our radio. An old one." "No kidding," Carter muttered, leaning closer to the screen. "The distortion on the voice, it's not simple signal degradation. It's too clean." And this he pointed to the visual representation of the whispers. On the screen, it wasn't the chaotic, fuzzy block of color that random noise produced. It was an intricate, almost woven pattern of tightly packed lines, like a digital tapestry. "This isn't static." Tanaka remained silent, letting the technician work. Carter's fingers flew across his keyboard, isolating frequencies, applying filters, his initial boredom replaced by a feverish intensity. He muted the distorted voice, focusing solely on the background hiss that underpinned the entire recording. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a dark, empty band running parallel to the vocal track. "Right here. The ambient room tone, the sound of your own breathing, the floorboards creaking, it should all be in this frequency range. But it's not there. It's gone." He zoomed in. "It's not just gone. It's been actively cancelled out. See these inverse waveforms? This is active noise cancellation. Whatever produced this signal was deliberately creating a pocket of silence around the voice to make it stand out." Tanaka felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Miller's words echoed in his head. "A frequency that hunts. It's a predator, Carter breathed, looking at the screen with something like awe. It's using our own broadcast principles against us. It isolates a target sound, in this case, your voice, and then it creates a null zone around it, eliminating competing sounds to ensure its lure is heard perfectly. It's not just mimicking you, officer. It's mastering your audio environment in real time. This is a level of signal manipulation that, well, frankly, it shouldn't be possible. He then isolated the whispering, the intricate pattern on the spectrograph. He ran it through a dozen decryption and language analysis programs. All of them came back with the same result. Data is not random, but pattern is unrecognizable. I can't tell you what it's saying, Carter said, finally leaning back and rubbing his tired eyes. But it's not noise. It's information. It's a dense, layered signal, more complex than anything I've ever seen. This whole thing, this wasn't just a broadcast. It was a package, delivered with tactical precision. He looked at Tanaka, his professional curiosity finally giving way to a flicker of fear. Whatever you recorded, it wasn't just on the radio. It was using the radio. The call came in just before 0300, a time when the night is at its darkest and the world seems to hold its breath. Deputy Alistair Finch was a 20-year veteran, a steady, unshakable presence whose voice over the radio was as familiar as the station's bad coffee. His transmissions were always calm, clipped, and professional. This one started no differently. "Dispatch, Unit 3, Finch's voice crackled, clear despite the distance. Conducting a 1055 on a sedan, Maryland plates, license plate reading Kilo Victor 937 Echo. Location is Route 9, mile marker 112. Single occupant." "Copy, Unit 3, the dispatcher replied, her voice sleepy but efficient. Mile marker 112. Standing by." Tanaka and Flores were parked at a scenic overlook 5 miles away, completing their patrol logs. The air was cold and still. They listened idly, the transmission being routine background noise. "Occupant is male, seems cooperative," Finch continued. "Just want to run the plates, feels a little off. He's got no rear." Finch's voice cut off abruptly. It wasn't the fizzle of a weak signal or the crush of static. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The silence was followed a second later by a piercing, high-frequency squeal that made Tanaka flinch, grabbing at the volume knob. The sound lasted for 3 full seconds, a clean, electronic shriek that felt like a needle in the ear, before the channel went dead silent. "Unit 3, come in?" The dispatcher's voice said, now sharp with concern. "Deputy Finch, what is your status?" Silence. "Unit 3, respond." More silence. After 30 seconds of unanswered calls, the dispatcher's voice became a general alert. "All units in Sector 4, proceed to Route 9, mile marker 112, to check welfare of Unit 3. Possible 1000. Flores didn't need to be told twice. The cruiser was already roaring down the access road, its lights cutting through the darkness. The words from Miller's logbook felt like they were branded on the inside of Tanaka's skull. "Found cruiser in a ditch, Deputy Evans missing." This was how it started. A routine call, a brief transmission, and then nothing. They were the first to arrive. The scene was eerily placid. Finch's patrol car was parked perfectly on the shoulder of the empty 2-lane highway, its engine still idling smoothly. The blue and red lights atop the car were strobing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, casting shifting colors across the dark asphalt and the dense wall of pine trees that bordered the road. The sedan Finch had pulled over was gone. Tanaka and Flores exited their vehicle, weapons drawn, using their car doors for cover as they scanned the silent woods. "Finch!" Flores shouted, her voice swallowed by the vast, empty night. There was no answer. They approached the cruiser cautiously, clearing the area with their flashlights. The driver's side door was wide open. The passenger door, too. Inside, the dome light illuminated an empty vehicle. A half-full coffee cup sat in the console. A clipboard with an unfinished warning ticket lay on the passenger seat. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the man who was supposed to be there. There were no scuff marks on the road, no shell casings, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Deputy Finch had simply evaporated mid-sentence. Tanaka leaned into the open driver's side door, his eyes drawn to the source of the only sound on the scene besides their own breathing, the radio. It wasn't broadcasting static or silence. From the speaker came a soft but distinct sound, a rhythmic, mechanical clicking. Click, 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 click. It was a steady, metronomic beat, a clean and precise sound that was utterly alien to the normal chaos of radio waves. It wasn't Tia's signal trying to connect, it was a signal that had arrived. Flores stood on the other side of the car, her face pale in the flashing lights. Her eyes met Tanaka's over the roof of the empty cruiser. She didn't have to say anything. They both knew. The frequency hadn't just lured them to a dead house this time. It had gone hunting. And it had made a catch. The search for Alistair Finch began by the book. Search and rescue teams grid the dense woods bordering Route 9. K9 units worked the area, but the dogs grew agitated and confused, whining and refusing to track past the edge of the asphalt. The official theory, floated for the benefit of the press and the younger deputies, was that Finch had been ambushed and abducted. It was a violent but understandable explanation. It was also a lie. The veterans, the ones who had worked under Sergeant Miller, knew the truth. They avoided each other's eyes and kept their radio chatter to an absolute minimum. A heavy, unspoken dread settled over the department. The first call came 3 days after the disappearance. Deputy Frank Reynolds, Finch's partner for over a decade, was coordinating a search grid when his radio crackled to life, not on the main dispatch channel, but on his private tactical frequency. "Frank, you there?" It was Alistair Finch's voice. Not a recording, not a distorted mimicry, but his voice, filled with the familiar, weary rasp Reynolds had heard 1,000 times. Reynolds froze, his hand hovering over the transmit button. "Dispatch, did you hear that?" Reynolds asked, his voice strained. "Negative, Unit 5. Your TAC channel is private," came the reply. "Al? Al, is that you? Where are you?" Reynolds transmitted, his voice breaking with a desperate hope that defied all logic. The voice on the other end chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Remember that fishing cabin on Bear Lake, Frank? The one we never told the wives about? I'm there. It's cold. Bring my heavy coat when you come." Every deputy within earshot of Reynolds' radio stopped what they were doing. The Bear Lake cabin was a secret the two men had kept for 15 years. It was their escape, a place no one else knew about. It was a lure so perfect, so deeply personal, it couldn't be anything but real. Or a trap so profoundly evil it was unthinkable. Before Reynolds could respond, Sergeant Rostova's voice cut through the main channel, sharp as broken glass. "Unit 5, do not acknowledge that transmission. I repeat, you do not respond. Return to the command post. Now." The panic that had been simmering below the surface began to boil over. The entity wasn't just repeating words anymore, it was using memories. It had consumed Finch, and now it was peering into his life, picking through his relationships, and weaponizing the trust he had built over 20 years. The calls continued, each one a precision strike. It called a young officer Finch had been mentoring, using Finch's voice to remind him to pick up his wife's prescription, referencing the specific pharmacy and the name of the medication. It broadcast a snippet of a lullaby Finch used to sing to his daughter, a song only his immediate family would know. The department began to fracture. The lifeline that connected them, the radio, was now a conduit for psychological terror. Every crackle of static made officers jump. Some began refusing to patrol alone. Others turned their radios down so low they were functionally useless, preferring the isolation to the risk of hearing a dead man whisper their secrets. Tanaka watched the slow motion collapse from a grin-informed distance. He saw the truth that Rostova had been trying to contain with her unspoken protocols. This wasn't a monster that simply killed you, it was a predator that dismantled you first. It learned. After the incident at the farmhouse, it had learned that a generic lore, a sister's voice, could be verified and disproven. So it had taken Finch, and in doing so, it had acquired a library of unimpeachable, intimate details. It had upgraded its tactics. It had moved from simple mimicry to emotional vivisection, using a trusted friend's voice to turn every officer's personal life into a potential vulnerability. It was hunting them not with teeth or claws, but with love and memory. The breaking point came at the end of the morning shift. A young deputy named O'Malley, barely a year on the force, was returning to the station when his radio chirped. Finch's voice, warm and paternal, filled O'Malley's cruiser. It asked him if Head remembered to pick up the diaper rash cream for his infant son, Liam, and casually mentioned the brand the boy's sensitive skin required. O'Malley's panicked, choked transmission to dispatch was broadcast across all channels. Head swerved into the oncoming lane, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision with a logging truck. That was enough. Sergeant Rostova called a mandatory, station-wide briefing for the start of the evening shift. Every available officer was packed into the main briefing room, the air thick with tension, exhaustion, and the sour smell of burnt coffee. Rostova stood at the front, her face set like stone. She didn't offer condolences for Finch or platitudes about their ongoing investigation. She dealt in procedure. As of 1800 hours, she began, her voice cutting through the murmuring, "This department is enacting Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha. I am calling it the Radio Silence Protocol." A wave of confusion rippled through the room. The younger officers looked at each other, bewildered. The veterans just stared at Rostova, their expressions grim. "Our voice communications network has been compromised," she stated, offering a partial truth that was more terrifying than any lie. "It is being used to create confusion and endanger officer safety. Therefore, we are taking it away from the enemy." She laid out the new rules with blunt, non-negotiable finality. Voice transmissions were now restricted to Code 3 emergencies only, officer in distress, shots fired, active life or death situations. Every other form of communication was to be routed through the encrypted messaging client on their mobile data terminals. Running plates, requesting backup for a non-emergent situation, reporting a completed call, even simple status checks, all of it had to be typed. "There will be no more chatter," she said, her eyes sweeping across the room, lingering for a moment on Tanaka. "You do not confirm receipt of a message verbally. You do not ask for clarification over the air. The radio is for emergencies, period. Any violation of this protocol will result in immediate suspension pending a full review. There will be no exceptions. Are there any questions?" The silence was her answer. The implication was clear: the very tool that bound them together as a cohesive unit was now the primary threat. To protect themselves, they had to sever the connection. Patrol at night was a profoundly isolating experience. Tanaka sat in the passenger seat, the cruiser's cabin enveloped in a heavy, unnatural quiet. The familiar, comforting presence of the dispatcher's voice was gone. The sporadic check-ins from other units, the shared mundane details that created a sense of a safety net, all of it had been replaced by a digital void. The only sounds were the engine, the tires on the asphalt, and the soft tapping of Flora's fingers on the NDT keyboard as she messaged their position to dispatch. They were no longer a pack, roaming the county with the knowledge that help was just a button press away. They were individual, disconnected islands of light and steel adrift in an ocean of darkness. The new danger became apparent during a routine stop of a vehicle with a broken taillight. As Flores initiated the stop, Tanaka's hand went instinctively to the radio mic before he stopped himself. Flores pulled the driver over, then had to put the cruiser in park, her full attention diverted from the vehicle in front of them to type out the license plate number into the MDT. For 15 critical seconds, her eyes were down, fixed on the screen, her focus on spelling out the request correctly. Tanaka kept his gaze locked on the stopped car, his hand on his sidearm, feeling a profound sense of vulnerability. In those 15 seconds, anything could have happened. A door could have flown open, a weapon could have been drawn. The instantaneous, instinctual act of calling in a plate had been replaced by a slow, distracting, and dangerous procedure. They were safe from the hunter's voice, but in their self-imposed silence, they had become deaf, dumb, and dangerously blind. While the department operated under the crushing weight of the radio silence, Tanaka sought out the only person who might offer a different kind of answer. He found Ben Carter in his basement workshop, looking even more haggard than usual. The technician had been trying to trace the phantom calls of Finch's voice. He had been obsessively deconstructing the original recording from the farmhouse and the 3-second electronic squeal that had preceded Finch's disappearance. He treated them not as paranormal events, but as complex data problems. "It's not broadcasting from a single point," Carter said without preamble, gesturing for Tanaka to look at a large monitor displaying a topographical map of the county. The map was overlaid with a complex web of lines and intersecting arcs. "That's the problem. The signals are too clean, too perfect. They don't degrade over distance the way normal radio waves do. It's like they're originating from everywhere at once." Tanaka looked at the map. "So it's useless? We can't find the source?" "I didn't say that," Carter corrected, a glint of manic energy in his eyes. "I said we can't trace the broadcast. But the carrier wave, that's a different story." He brought up another screen showing a complex waveform. "This is the squeal from Finch's last transmission. I've been comparing it to the static from your farmhouse recording. They're not the same, but they're related. The farmhouse static was a complex data package. This squeal, this is raw power. It's the engine." Carter explained that while the entity could make its voice seem to come from anywhere, the underlying energy pulse that carried the signal had to have a point of origin. It was like seeing the flash of lightning, even if the thunder seemed to come from all around. That brief, high-frequency shriek was the flash. And it had left a faint, almost undetectable energy signature, a resonance in the county's old copper wire infrastructure. "The old-timers used to complain about it for years," Carter explained, pulling out a dusty, leather-bound county planning map from the 1950s. "Dead zones, ghost signals, weird magnetic fluctuations that would screw with their compasses. They always blamed the geology. Turns out, they were right." He began cross-referencing the faint energy signatures with the old archival map and Finch's last known coordinates on Route 9. He plotted the locations of every incident from Sergeant Miller's logbook that included a specific address. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The lines of intersection on his digital map, which had previously seemed random, started to converge on a single, remote area deep within the state forest. It was a section of the map that was marked as a topographical anomaly, a place modern GPS and satellite imagery rendered poorly due to high magnetic interference. "There is no broadcast tower there," Tanaka said, studying the map. "No power lines. There is nothing there." "Exactly," Carter said, a triumphant, fearful look on his face. He pointed to a faint, circular depression on the old paper map, an area labeled with a handwritten annotation in faded ink. "According to this, there is something there. It's not man-made." The label read Meteorite Impact Site EST aged 10,000 years. Below it, in a different, shakier hand, someone had scrawled a local nickname, the Devil's Basin. "A massive iron-nickel meteorite struck this area thousands of years ago," Carter explained, his voice hushed. "The county's geological survey from 58 notes it has one of the highest concentrations of magnetic ferrous metals on the continent. It's a natural amplifier. A giant, underground antenna." He looked from the map to Tanaka, the puzzle pieces clicking into a terrifying picture. "It's not hiding in our radio network, officer. It is the network. This thing isn't just broadcasting from the basin. The basin is the heart, and every scrap of metal, every copper phone line, every radio tower in this county is part of its circulatory system. That's why the signals are so perfect. They're not traveling over the air. They're already there, resonating through the ground beneath our feet." Tanaka presented Carter's findings to Sergeant Rostova, not as a theory, but as a tactical briefing. He laid the old map next to the digital overlay on a tablet, the lines of evidence converging on the Devil's Basin. He half expected her to dismiss it, to stick to the sanctioned reality of Finch's abduction. Instead, she listened with a grim stillness, her eyes tracing the lines on the map as if she were reading a story she already knew by heart. When he was finished, she simply said, "Gear up. Flores is with you. I'll run interference on this end, keep the official search focused elsewhere. Maintain silence protocol until you can't." It was an authorization. An off-the-books sanction for a mission that could not officially exist. The drive into the state forest was a gradual descent into a more primal world. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a barely there dirt track overgrown with weeds. The dense canopy of ancient pines blotted out the midday sun, plunging the trail into a perpetual twilight. Their MDT lost its signal 5 miles out, the final tether to the outside world snapping. They were on their own. They left the cruiser when the track became impassable and proceeded on foot, Tanaka with a rifle, Flores with a shotgun. The air grew heavy, charged with a strange, static quality that made the hairs on their arms stand up. Compasses spun uselessly. They navigated by the sun's faint glow through the trees and the steady downward slope of the terrain, heading for the lowest point. The first sign that they were getting close was not something they saw, but something they heard, or rather, felt. A low, sub-audible hum vibrated up through the soles of their boots, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock of the earth. Then, the radios on their vests, both switched completely off, clicked on. It wasn't a single voice, but a tidal wave of sound that erupted from the small speakers, a chaotic, disorienting flood of audio fragments. Tanaka recognized the panicked, thin voice of a deputy named Evans, reported missing in 1978, screaming about being lost in the woods. He heard the calm, procedural tone of Finch reporting his final traffic stop, single occupant feels a little off, cut short by the same electronic squeal they'd all heard. A woman's voice, sobbing and pleading for her husband who'd gone hunting and never returned in 1985. A child crying for his mother, a name taken from a missing persons report from 1994. The voices weren't separate, they were layered, tangled together, a horrifying collage of the county's lost souls. Snippets of their last moments, their last words, were woven into a tapestry of fear and confusion. Flores stumbled, her hands flying up to cover her ears, but the sound was coming from the radio on her own vest, inches from her head. Tanaka fought down a wave of vertigo. The air was thick with the voices, a sonic assault that bypassed the ears and seemed to drill directly into the skull. Underneath the human voices, like a river of filth carrying the rest, was the dry, insectal whispering from the farmhouse radio, louder now, clearer, a sibilant, chittering chorus that formed the foundation of the horrifying symphony. "Turn it off!" Flores yelled over the den, fumbling with the knob on her radio. "It is off!" Tanaka shouted back, holding up his own radio to show her the dead switch. The entity wasn't just broadcasting. It was projecting. The closer they got to its heart, the more powerful its signal became, capable of activating dead electronics, of turning their own equipment against them. This wasn't a lure anymore, it was a defense mechanism, a wall of pure auditory chaos designed to disorient and overwhelm any who drew too near. They were walking into the throat of the beast, and it was screaming at them with the voices of everyone it had ever swallowed. Pushing through the cacophony required a primal act of will. Tanaka and Flores moved forward, weapons at the ready, forcing themselves to treat the chorus of the dead as mere background noise. They broke through the final line of trees and the ground fell away sharply before them. They were standing on the lip of the Devil's Basin. The crater was a perfect, mile-wide bowl carved out of the earth, its sides steep and barren. The floor was a flat expanse of dark, metallic-looking rock, unnaturally smooth and devoid of any vegetation. The air hummed, the low-frequency vibration now a palpable force that thrummed against their chests. The cacophony of voices intensified, swirling around the basin as if trapped within its walls, creating a vortex of sound. And at the exact center, something rose from the crater floor. It was not a rock formation, nor was it a tree. It looked like both, and neither. Standing roughly 30 feet tall, it was a gnarled, branching structure of blackened rock and a substance that looked disturbingly like fused, melted metal. It twisted upward like a dead oak, its limbs reaching toward the overcast sky. A faint, sickly violet light pulsed from within its core, the slow, rhythmic beat of a monstrous heart. The light waxed and waned in time with the deep hum that resonated through the ground. As they carefully made their way down the crater's steep incline, the details of the structure came into horrifying focus. It wasn't just made of rock and metal. Other objects were fused into its surface, integrated into its very being as if they had been absorbed. These were the relics of the lost, a macabre memorial to the unheard. Tanaka saw a rusted pair of wire-rimmed glasses, the kind a man named Peterson was wearing in his academy photo from 1985. A small, mud-caked hiking boot with a single red lace, matching the description from a missing child report in the 90s. Near the base, half submerged in the metallic rock, was a tarnished silver sheriff's badge, the five-pointed star of a design the department had used since the early 70s. The structure was a trophy case. A graveyard. Each object was a remnant, a final physical piece of a person who had been drawn in and consumed. It was using these items, these anchors to the human world, as part of its grotesque anatomy. Flores let out a sharp, choked gasp, pointing with a trembling hand. Near the top of the central trunk, gleaming in the pulsating purple light, was a modern, department-issue sidearm, its polymer frame and steel slide fused seamlessly into the alien architecture. Below it, caught on a jagged spur, was a single, silver collar pen. The number 3 was clearly visible. It was Alistair Finch's. Tanaka finally understood. The voices, the memories, the personal details, they weren't just echoes. The entity absorbed its victims, and with them, it absorbed their knowledge, their possessions, their very essence. This grotesque pillar wasn't just the source of the broadcast, it was the broadcaster itself. An organic, geological antenna built of stone and metal and bone, powered by a force they couldn't comprehend, and adorned with the final, silent screams of its prey. It was a monument to its own hunger, pulsing at the heart of the county's darkness. Their retreat from the Devil's Basin was a forced, disciplined withdrawal. The sonic assault battered them the entire way, a constant, overlapping stream of pleas and warnings from the dead. It wasn't until they were back in the cruiser, miles away from the crater's influence, that the radios finally fell silent. The abrupt peace was more jarring than the noise had been. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that the ringing in their ears didn't already convey. Tanaka bypassed the station, driving directly to the county maintenance depot where Ben Carter had set up a secondary, more private workshop. He found the technician pacing in front of a bank of monitors, a diagram of the crater they'd sent him from their NDT before losing the signal displayed on the main screen. "It's a resonator," Carter said, pointing a trembling finger at the image of the grotesque antenna. The iron in the crater acts as a parabolic dish, focusing the ambient electromagnetic energy of the entire region. The central structure, that thing you saw, it's the transducer. It converts that raw energy into the specific frequencies it needs to hunt. Tanaka gave him the tactical summary: the structure's composition, the integrated relics, the sheer overwhelming power of the broadcast at close range. "We can't destroy it," Tanaka concluded, his voice flat with exhaustion. "We don't have the ordnance. And even if we did, we have no idea what would happen if we blew it up." "Blowing it up is the wrong approach," Carter said, his eyes wild with an idea. "You don't fight a radio signal with a bomb. You fight it with a better signal. The radio silence protocol, it's a tactical retreat, but it's not a solution. It lets the entity control the battlefield. We've been trying to starve it by being quiet. We need to do the opposite. We need to choke it." He spun around and pulled a heavy canvas tarp off a strange-looking device on his workbench. It was a metal briefcase packed with a chaotic assembly of capacitors, broadcast coils, and a repurposed military-grade power cell. A thick, telescoping antenna protruded from the top. "This thing's intelligence, its greatest weapon, is its ability to listen," Carter explained, patting the briefcase. "It isolates specific frequencies, a voice, a cry for help, and manipulates the surrounding soundscape to make that lure perfect. It thrives on clarity. So, we give it the opposite. We give it chaos." He called it the nullifier. It wasn't designed to produce a single, targeted frequency. Instead, it was engineered to broadcast across every conceivable spectrum simultaneously, from subsonic lows to ultra-high-frequency radio waves. "It's not silence," Carter said. "It's the sound of everything at once. Pure, high-wattage, wide-spectrum noise. White noise, pink noise, brown noise, every color of the damn rainbow. When we activate this thing, it will flood the entire basin with so much unstructured audio information that the entity won't be able to isolate a single, coherent frequency to process or mimic. It's like trying to have a conversation in the middle of a jet engine factory while 100 orchestras play 100 different songs. It can't hunt if it can't hear." The plan was simple in theory, suicidal in practice. They had to get the device to the base of the antenna and activate it. It's got a dead man switch, Carter added, showing them a small, handheld trigger connected to the case by a reinforced cable. Once you arm it, you've got 60 seconds to get clear before it fires up. The initial power draw will create a massive electromagnetic pulse. Anything electronic within 50 yards that isn't shielded will be fried, including radios, phones, and pacemakers. He looked at Tanaka, his expression deadly serious. This isn't a jammer that you can just turn off. This is a one-way trip. Once you flip that switch, you are deafening it permanently. Or you're just going to make it very, very angry. The plan coalesced in the cold, pre-dawn hours in Rostova's office. It was a 3-person operation. Rostova, Flores, and Tanaka. There would be no official record, no request for backup, no departmental sanction. They were a ghost team hunting a ghost. Rostova laid out the tactical nap of the basin. Carter's theory is sound, she said, her voice low and grave. But it relies on us getting the nullifier to the base of that thing. The moment we enter the crater, it will know we're there. It will hit us with everything it has. Flores traced a path down the northern slope. We were able to move under the auditory assault before. We can do it again. Last time, we were just scouts, Tanaka countered, his eyes fixed on the map. We weren't a direct threat. This time, we're carrying a weapon. It will focus on us. It will try to separate us, disorient us. It will use the voices, the whispers. It will be 1,000 times worse. He looked from Flores to Rostova. It can't focus on all of us at once. Not with equal intensity. Carter said it isolates its targets. We need to give it a single, primary target to isolate. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air. Someone had to be the lure. Someone had to walk into the heart of the storm and scream, "Look at me," to draw the entity as full, undivided attention, giving the others a window to plant the device. "I'll do it," Flores said immediately, her jaw set. "No," Rostova and Tanaka said in unison. "It used your sister's voice, Flores," Rostova said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You're a vulnerability. It knows what buttons to push with you. It has to be someone it hasn't T-profiled yet." Her eyes fell on Tanaka. "It has to be me," Tanaka affirmed, meeting her gaze. "It's already used my voice, but only in a simple mimicry. It hasn't dug into me yet. I'm a new signal." He tapped the map. "You and Flores will take the nullifier and approach from the east ridge, using the rock formations for cover. I'll take a vehicle, one of the old department ATVs, and approach from the west, the most exposed route. I'll go in loud." "What do you mean, loud?" Flores asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Tanaka picked up a spare radio handset from the desk. "I mean, I'm breaking the radio silence protocol. The moment I cross the crater's edge, I'm going to light up the main dispatch channel. I'm going to talk. I'm going to give it a signal so clear, so personal, and so tempting it won't be able to resist focusing all its energy on me." It was a terrifying gamble. He would be willingly feeding the machine, offering it the very thing it used to hunt. He would turn himself into the perfect bait. They drove out in separate vehicles under the cover of darkness, parting ways at the edge of the state forest. Tanaka parked the cruiser and mounted the ATV, its engine a loud, growling intrusion in the silent woods. The nullifier was strapped to the back of Rostova and Flores' own ATV. They exchanged a single, final nod before disappearing down a different track. As Tanaka approached the lip of the Devil's Basin, he took a deep breath. The low, subterranean hum was already vibrating through the ATV's frame. He switched on his radio, the silence on the channel feeling vast and sacred. He was about to desecrate it. He pushed the ATV over the edge, rolling down the barren slope into the belly of the beast. The instant his tires touched the crater floor, the radios on his vest, his primary and his backup, screamed to life with the now familiar chorus of the damned. He ignored it. He keyed the mic on his handset, breaking a week of enforced silence. "This is Officer Kenji Tanaka," he broadcast, his voice steady, projecting a calm he did not feel. I am conducting a solo patrol in the State Forest Reserve. Code 4, all clear. He began to talk, narrating his actions, describing the metallic rock of the crater floor. Then he shifted, making it personal. He spoke about his transfer from the city, the reason he left, a shootout where his partner had been wounded. He gave it details. Names. Dates. He laid out his memories, his fears, his regrets, broadcasting them into the heart of the entity. He was opening his own personnel file, his own soul, and handing it over. He watched the antenna in the distance. The violet light within it seemed to pulse faster. The cacophony of other voices began to fade, the volume dipping as the whispers grew louder, more focused. It was working. The predator was turning its gaze. It was listening to the new, interesting voice that was telling it all its secrets. As Tanaka drove the ATV in a wide, slow circle around the crater's perimeter, the entity's response began. The chaotic storm of lost voices subsided, collapsing into a focused, targeted silence. The only sound left was the low hum of the basin and the crunch of the ATV's tires on the metallic rock. The hunter had isolated its prey. Tanaka continued his broadcast, feeding it memories of his academy days, his first arrest, the bitter taste of precinct coffee. He was a fisherman, chumming the water, waiting for the bite. The bite came. His radio crackled, not with static, but with a warm, familiar tone that stopped his heart. Kenji? Is that you, son? It was a voice he hadn't heard in 20 years, not since the oncology ward had stolen it from the world. It was his father's voice. Perfect. Not just the sound, but the gentle, questioning cadence, the slight weariness that always lingered at the edges of his words. Tanaka's hands tightened on the handlebars of the ATV, his knuckles white. He had not spoken of his father. He had not broadcast a single memory of him. You're driving too fast again, son, the voice continued, a phantom chuckle echoing in the transmission. Just like when you were 16 in my old pickup. You're going to strip the gears. A memory, sharp and vivid, flashed through Tanaka's mind, a sun-drenched afternoon on a deserted country road, his father patiently trying to teach him to drive a manual transmission, the truck lurching and stalling. A memory so private, so deeply buried, it was a part of his own bedrock. And this thing, this entity of rock and whispers, had somehow excavated it. Dad? The word escaped Tanaka's lips before he could stop it, a choked, involuntary whisper into the open air. He didn't key the mic, but he knew it didn't matter. It could hear him. It's all right, Kenji. I know you're scared, his father's voice soothed, a wave of pure, weaponized empathy. You always were a warrior. Remember that little sparrow with the broken wing you found? You sat with it all night in his shoebox, just to make sure it was okay. You always had a good heart. The psychological assault was masterful, bypassing every wall of his professional training. This wasn't a distorted mimicry like the farmhouse. It wasn't using second-hand memories like it had with Finch. This was a direct, surgical intrusion into his own mind. It had taken the bait of his broadcast memories and used them to somehow pry open the rest of him, pulling out the most emotionally potent weapon it could find. It was trying to break him, to make him stop, to make him doubt his own reality. Turn back, son, the voice pleaded, now laced with a father's desperate concern. This place isn't for you. Come home. Your mother is worried. His mother was alive and well, living in Arizona. But his father didn't know that. The entity's knowledge was perfect, but locked in the amber of 1999, the year he had died. It was using a ghost's perspective. The detail was so flawless, so intimate, it was almost enough to make him believe. Tanaka squeezed his eyes shut for a second, fighting the tide of grief and confusion. He glanced toward the east ridge. He could just make out two small figures, Rostova and Flores, moving through the shadows toward the base of the antenna. They were halfway there. He just had to hold its attention a little longer. He forced himself to speak, his own voice sounding alien and hollow. You're not him, he said, the words a shield against the phantom's assault. The voice on the radio changed. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, flat disappointment. I give you a choice, it said in his father's voice. I offered you comfort. But you are a policeman, just like you always wanted to be. Duty-bound. A shame. The transmission ended, and the silence that followed was colder and more terrifying than any voice had been. O.T. The oral void left by his father's voice was instantly filled by a new, more terrifying sound. The central antenna, which had been pulsing with a steady, rhythmic violet light, began to glow with a furious, erratic intensity. The low hum of the crater floor rose in pitch to an agonizing, high-frequency keen. The entity was no longer trying to lure or deceive, it was lashing out. It had been defied, and its answer was a raw, unfiltered projection of power. Tanaka gunned the ATV's engine, weaving across the open ground, making himself a difficult target for something. He didn't know what form the attack would take, but he could feel the pressure in the air changing, the static charge becoming so thick it felt like wading through water. His sacrifice had bought the team time, but the window was closing. On the far side of the crater, Rostova and Flores scrambled over the last of the rock formations, the heavy nullifier briefcase between them. They were at the base of the antenna. The structure loomed over them, a monument of fused rock and stolen memories, the pulsing light from its core casting them in strobing shades of purple. The keen was deafening here, a physical blow that vibrated through their bones. Rostova provided cover, her rifle trained on the pulsating trunk of the antenna, while Flores knelt, her hands shaking as she unlatched the briefcase. She flipped open the lid, revealing the chaotic guts of Carter's machine. Her fingers found the arming switch, a heavy, red-top toggle protected by a safety cover. She flipped the cover and engaged the switch. A single green light on the console began to blink, the 60-second countdown commencing. As if sensing the new, immediate threat, the antenna pulsed violently. The keen it was emitting fractured, breaking apart into 1,000 different sounds at once. It was the chorus of the lost, but twisted and corrupted, the voices sped up into unintelligible shrieks, played backwards, layered into a sonic sludge of pure madness. It was the sound of 1,000 signals trying to broadcast at once through a single, overloaded channel. Go! Rostova yelled, pulling Flores to her feet. Move now! They turned and ran, scrambling back toward the relative safety of the crater's ridge. Tanaka saw them retreat. He saw the blinking green light at the base of the antenna. He wrenched the handlebars of his ATV, turning it away and flooring the accelerator, racing for the opposite slope. 30 seconds. The sonic shriek from the antenna reached a fever pitch. The purple light flared, becoming a blinding, solid beam that shot straight up into the overcast sky. The ground shook. Then, the nullifier activated. It wasn't a boom or an explosion. It was an anti-sound. A wave of absolute, crushing silence erupted from the briefcase, expanding outwards in a perfect, invisible sphere. As the wave passed over Tanaka, every sound in the universe vanished. The roar of his ATV's engine, the scream of the entity, the pounding of his own heart in his ears, all of it was gone, erased. It was a pressure, a physical weight of nothingness that felt more profound than any noise. For a single, agonizing moment, the two forces battled. The entity's 1,000 shrieking voices and the nullifier's perfect, infinite noise met in the air of the crater. The result was a sound that had no right to exist, a cacophony of digital tearing and organic screaming, the death rattle of a frequency being ripped apart. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. The perfect silence remained. The blinding violet light from the antenna sputtered, flickered, and died, plunging the heart of the crater into darkness. The deep, subterranean hum that had been a constant presence ceased, and the oppressive static charge in the air dissipated like smoke. There was only the silence. A pure, clean, and utterly alien quiet. A sound of nothing. In the aftermath, the silence of the Devil's Basin felt heavier than the noise it had replaced. They regrouped on the crater's rim, 3 officers coated in dust and exhaustion, the world unnaturally quiet around them. There were no triumphant words, no acknowledgments of the impossible thing they had just done. There was only the shared, weary understanding of a duty performed in the shadows. The return to the world of procedure and paperwork was jarring. The official narrative had to be constructed, a plausible fiction to paper over an impossible truth. Sergeant Rostova orchestrated it with the grim efficiency of a field surgeon closing a wound. First, the search for Alistair Finch was officially called off after a week. The final report, authored by Rostova and co-signed by the county sheriff, was a masterclass in bureaucratic misdirection. It cited mounting evidence of severe, undiagnosed personal and financial stressors leading to a presumed voluntary abandonment of post. They found a credit card statement showing Finch was in debt, a common enough affliction, and spun it into a motive. His spotless 20-year record was reframed as the rigid perfectionism of a man cracking under pressure. His wife's tearful insistence that he was happy became the denial of a woman who didn't want to see the truth. Alistair Finch, a good cop and a victim of a predator that defied physics, was officially reclassified as a deserter. It was a brutal, necessary betrayal, a final sacrifice of his reputation to protect the public's sense of a sane and ordered world. Next, the radio anomalies that had plagued the department were addressed in a dry, technical memo from Ben Carter. Working with a consultant from the State University who was fed a carefully curated set of atmospheric data, Carter co-authored a report attributing the intermittent signal degradation and phantom transmissions to a rare, cyclical atmospheric phenomenon. The report, filled with jargon about tropospheric ducting and geomagnetic fluctuations caused by the unique ferrous geology of the state forest, was dense, boring, and utterly convincing to anyone who didn't know better. It recommended a minor upgrade to the dispatch console as filtering software. The problem was officially solved. The final piece of the cover-up was the most personal. One evening, long after the station had emptied out, Rostova summoned Tanaka to the basement archives. She carried a galvanized metal trash can. Without a word, she unlocked locker 117 and removed Sergeant Miller's thick, black logbook. She didn't open it. She didn't read from it. She simply held it for a moment, the weight of its 30-year history in her hands. Miller was a good man, she said, her voice quiet in the dusty stillness. He saw what was happening, but he didn't have the tools to fight it. He could only watch and write it down. He hoped that one day, someone would be able to use it. She looked at Tanaka. We did. Its purpose is served. She placed the logbook into the trash can. She then poured a small amount of lighter fluid over it, the chemical smell sharp in the enclosed space. She struck a match. The flame caught with a soft whoosh, and the pages of the logbook began to curl and blacken, the ink of Miller's careful cursive and his desperate scrawls turning to ash. They stood in silence, watching the secret history of the department burn, the only light in the room coming from the contained fire. The protocols, the disappearances, the warnings, all of it was being redacted by flame. The incident at the Devil's Basin, the existence of the antenna, the truth of what happened to Finch and all the others, it never happened. It was an anomaly, a bad dream shared by 3 officers and a civilian technician, a story that would never be told. The world was safe, not because the monster was dead, but because no one would ever know it had existed at all. A fragile, tentative peace settled over the county in the weeks that followed. The radio silence protocol became the new standard operating procedure, and the department adapted with a grudging professionalism. The constant, silent tapping on MDT keyboards replaced the familiar cadence of the dispatcher's voice. Patrols felt longer, the nights darker, the silence between calls heavier than it had ever been. But the voices were gone. The phantom calls ceased. The fear that had coiled in the gut of every officer began to slowly, cautiously, unwind. Alistair Finch's memorial service was well attended, his flag-draped coffin a stark, final testament to the official lie. He was a good cop who had lost his way. The department mourned the man, if not the fiction. Life, in its relentless, mundane way, went on. Tanaka took on the late shifts by choice, finding a strange comfort in the deep quiet of the station after midnight. It was a time for paperwork, for cleaning and checking equipment, for the simple, methodical tasks that kept the machinery of law and order running. He was in the dispatch center, a space now almost always empty save for the lone night dispatcher, conducting a routine diagnostic on the main console. Ben Carter's new filters had been installed, and procedure dictated a weekly check of all channel frequencies. He worked his way down the panel, testing each channel, listening to the clean, empty hiss of an open carrier wave. It was a sound he had come to associate with safety. The silence was their victory, hard-won and paid for in blood and memory. He was about to sign off on the checklist when he heard it. It was a sound so faint he almost missed it, a tiny anomaly buried deep in the low band frequency used for emergency paging. It wasn't static. It wasn't a voice. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like a loose wire sparking against a metal frame. Click. Click, click, click. Click. He paused, listening intently. A technical glitch, most likely. An artifact of the old system struggling against the new filters. He was about to make a note for Carter to check it in the morning, but the patter repeated. Click. Click, click, click. Click. It was consistent. Too consistent to be random. He leaned closer to the speaker, turning up the gain just enough to isolate the sound from the background hum of the electronics. He closed his eyes, focusing only on the rhythm. He wasn't an expert, but in the academy, they had all been taught the basics, the alphabet of desperation for a downed pilot or a trapped miner. The pattern was slow, deliberate. Dot 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 dot. Dot 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 dot. Dot dot dot. He traced the letters in his mind. 4 dots. The letter H. 5 dots. The number 5. 3 dots. S. It wasn't a word. He listened again, the sequence repeating in a steady, patient loop. It wasn't T letters. It was numbers. Dot 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 dash. 4. Dash dot 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 dot. 7. Dash 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 dot. Niner. 4. 7. Niner. Tanaka straightened up as if he'd received an electric shock. A cold dread, colder than anything had felt in the basin, washed over him. He stared at the dispatch console, at the blinking green lights that indicated a system was functioning normally. But it wasn't normal. It was his badge number. The entity wasn't dead. It wasn't gone. They had taken its voice, its ability to weave complex lures from memory and sound, and in the profound, crushing silence they had forced upon it, it had learned a new language. It had been stripped down to the most fundamental form of broadcast, the simple, binary language of on and off, of sound and silence. And it was using that new language to send a message, a patient, persistent tapping that cut through the quiet. It wasn't a warning this time. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a simple, chilling statement of fact, a whisper in a new kind of static. I am still here, it said. And I remember you. The official report will always be a lie, a necessary fiction to keep the world turning. We answered what came back for Deputy Finch, and the price was a new, deeper silence. But some things refused to be silenced, they just learned to speak in quieter, more patient ways, tapping from the darkness we created. You have to wonder if the static we hear now is any safer than the voices we chose to forget. These are the kinds of entries we preserve here in the Keeper of the Dark logs, because the choices made in these shadows are never clean. They stay with you, long after the file is closed. So I'll ask you, was Sergeant Rostova right to sacrifice Deputy Finch's reputation, officially branding him a deserter to protect the public from a truth they couldn't handle? Stay safe out there, and watch your 6. We'll be back soon to open the next file, one that documents what happens when the tapping stops just calling a number, and starts spelling out a name.